of Earth, the Operator's Manual by Richard Alley. He's an internationally acclaimed climate scientist. Some of you may have heard him speak last December when Dan arranged for him to bring his message to Ogden. Today, almost 7 billion of us live side by side, whales and woodlands, because we get almost all the energy we use from coal, oil, and natural gas. If we suddenly quit using these fossil fuels and return to burning whale oil and wood, we wouldn't come close to powering enough of our tractors, trucks, and irrigation pumps to feed us all. The good we get from fossil fuels is a mixed blessing. If we keep using them and accept the risk of oil well blowouts and mountaintop removals for long enough, the fossil fuels will run out, and we are burning them at about 1 million times faster than nature saved them for us all. We thus must decide whether to burn most of the fossil fuels and then look for replacements, or to learn while we burn and while we still have a fossil fuel safety net in the ground. Our decision must be made under the shadow of global warming from the CO2 released by burning fossil fuels. We have high scientific confidence that continuing to burn fossil fuels will cause large climate changes, which will make life more difficult for people living in hot places now and for most people in future generations. CO2 emissions especially harm poor people. Therefore, are we wiser to reduce emissions or to reduce poverty by helping people become wealthier? Not surprisingly, economists answer yes, do some of each. How much of each may depend on national security, jobs, ethics, insurance, as well as economics. You will hear a lot of shouting from the wings that particularly drowns out discussion of these important issues. But this shouting is nothing new. President Abraham Lincoln's administration found ways to get good scientific advice through the noise and through his example, and his example still works. I will try to stick closely to Lincoln's example to give you the best scientific insights. There are things that science doesn't know, more things that I don't know, and I am far from infallible. But much of the science really is solid, and I will tell you when it isn't. Being a truly honest broker on such complex topics may be impossible, but I will do my best for you. This could be easier for me than for most people. I enjoyed working for an oil company and benefited from its largest. My political registration is right of center. And I have won scientific awards for helping show just how bizarrely Earth's climate can behave without an interference from us. But I also helped the U.S. National Academy of Sciences and played a small role in the Nobel Prize-winning effort of the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, where my knowledge of Earth's history and behavior contributed to the confident realization that CO2 from our fossil fuel burning is highly likely to change the world in fundamental ways that will increasingly make life harder for future generations. My 2 daughters give me a personal as well as a professional stake in the search for a stable, sustainable world. Onward.
you very much. That was beautiful and exactly right for today. Catherine, thank you very much for inviting me, and thank you all for having me here in this wonderful, beautiful space on this beautiful Sunday morning. It's a real pleasure, privilege, and honour to be here. Thank you. Catherine asked me to speak on something that would be appropriate for the theme of today, healing our planet. And I'd like to start by telling you a story about how I came to a realization about what happens to me when I try to heal. My father died in 2001, 15 years ago. He died fairly suddenly of cancer that had been diagnosed just a few months prior to his passing. And it was a shock to all of us in the family. My mother especially was devastated. And I was thousands of miles away. As you can tell, I'm not from around here originally. And I felt that a recognition and honouring of my father's life and his contributions to his community was important, an important step that we all needed to have in order to begin coming to terms with life without him. So I organised what ended up being a fairly sizable memorial service at the church in central London, where he was a paid member of the choir. He wasn't a religious man, my father, but he was a working musician living in London, and so he was cobbling together sources of income from wherever jobs would arise, and one of those was working for the choir and singing every Sunday to give heft to the voice on a Sunday morning. And the church was generous enough to allow us to hold the service there, and we filled the church, and we had a large number of his friends who were also singers were in there too, and belted out wonderful tunes in my father's memory. But it wasn't until after the service was over and some months had passed that I realised that whatever I'd been trying to do by way of helping the family heal and my father's friends and community heal wasn't really about helping them heal as much as it was about helping me heal. So all of the effort that I put in there was really about helping myself to come to terms with life without my father. And it's made me wonder how much of that applies when it comes to thinking about healing our planet. How much of that is about healing the earth, and how much of it is about healing ourselves? So, a couple of questions. First of all, is the planet in need of healing? There are a number of signs that would suggest yes, we've got a fairly serious situation on our hands. The current year, 2016, is very likely, almost certain in fact, to be the warmest year on record around the world as a whole, so for the Earth as a whole. 2016 will almost certainly be the warmest year on record. Does anyone know what the current warmest year on record is? 2015. 2015. Anyone know what the previous warmest year on record was? 2014. Then you have to go back a few years, not many, but a few years further back to get to the warmest year on record before that. So by the end of this year, once the beginning of 2017 kicks in and the various scientific organisations like NASA start to crunch the numbers and finalise their decisions, we will almost certainly find that 2016 was the warmest year on record. The warmest year before that was 2015, the warmest year before that was 2014. The Earth is warming up, and the evidence now is so strong that there are very, very few people who can really close their eyes and close their minds to the existence of that evidence. We're seeing consequences from that warming. It's not just that it's getting warmer, we're seeing more dramatic extremes of weather. We're seeing drought in California that's close to historic. We're seeing downpours, torrential rain in Louisiana that results in people dying. It's not just a little bit of heavy rain, it produces floods that kill people, thousands in India, heat waves killing hundreds in Russia. So we're seeing some fairly dramatic consequences coming along with the increase in temperature. So the rise in temperature is just one part of a bigger picture. That rise in temperature indicates more energy in the climate system that's driving more extreme weather. And that extreme weather is having dire consequences for people. The scientific community is as close to certain as you can get in science that the increasing temperatures and the increasing extreme weather is happening because of increasing levels of carbon dioxide. We now have more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere than we've had at any time in the last 800,000 years. And this is something that we know. This is not something that we're extrapolating. This is not something that we're guessing based on computer estimations. We can measure how much carbon dioxide we've had in the atmosphere over that time period, because little bubbles of air are trapped in the ice of Greenland and Antarctica. Various different scientific teams have drilled back, going back down through the ice. Going down is the equivalent of going back in time. And we've gone down to 800,000 years into the past. And at no time have we seen levels of CO2 at the levels that they're at today. We also know, science also tells us what the source of that carbon dioxide is. And it's coming from us burning fossil fuels. That's the principal source of the CO2. So we know this. There is really no question about it. We know it's not coming from volcanoes. We know it's not coming from other sources. We know it's coming from burning fossil fuels. So human civilization is causing this increase in carbon dioxide that is in turn causing the warming of the planet. And that in turn is causing the extreme weather that we're experiencing on much of it. Add to this, we're also engaged in transformation of the Earth's surface at a scale that we haven't seen before. And that's driving a sixth mass extinction. The rate of species extinction is now anywhere between 1,000 and 10,000 times the background normal. So we're seeing a reduction in the number of species all around the world. Geologists are currently engaged in a fairly strenuous scientific debate and discussion about whether to officially label the time that we're living the Anthropocene, a whole new geologic epoch based on the kind of change that humans have brought about to the Earth. The idea being that if we go millions of years into the future, will we be able to see in the geologic record that something dramatic happened today, happened in the time that we're living? And the answer to that is almost certainly yes. The debate currently centres on when should we say the Anthropocene began. It's really not a question of whether we're living in the Anthropocene. It's a question of the scientific details of exactly when the Anthropocene began. So we can see signs. There's evidence all over that the Earth may be in need of healing. One of the most dramatic is at the North Pole, the Arctic sea ice. Arctic sea ice reached a record low in terms of its September extent in 2012, and it keeps on dipping down. There are years when it goes up, but the overall trend is downwards. So we're seeing progressively less and less ice. And again, a lot of this is not rocket science. As the Earth warms up, the ice starts to melt. So this is what we're seeing in the Arctic. And Arctic sea ice melting is a particularly dramatic and easily communicated example of the effects of humans on the global environment. But it has dramatic knock-on consequences as well. It's not just a case of losing the ice, because there are animals that depend on the ice, and an entire ecosystem that depends on the existence of Arctic sea ice. Most obviously, polar bears. Polar bears need Arctic sea ice as a platform on which to hunt their main food, which is seals. There have been some people who've argued, well, it's fine without the sea ice, that polar bears will just go onto land and they'll behave like regular bears. Well, actually not so much. Polar bears are the largest land carnivore on Earth. They need a lot of calories, and the calories that they need can't be obtained from sources other than seals. Seals are tremendously energy-rich, calorie-rich. They have a lot of blubber. They've got the kind of calories that can sustain a polar bear. Grubbing around for roots and berries on land is not going to do it for them. So melting Arctic sea ice is imperiling polar bears and the web of life in the Arctic Ocean that sustains them. This strikes me particularly close to home. I've never met a polar bear. I don't have any polar bears in my family. But my 7-year-old daughter Emma decided she wanted to be a polar bear for Halloween last year. And Her little brother Henry has decided that they're both going to be seals this year. So this raised for me the rather disturbing thought that a woman named Sandra Steingraber, who's a friend of my wife's family, she's also a very distinguished biologist and author. She spoke at Weber State a few years ago. She's written, among other books, a marvelous book called Living Downstream, which is also a documentary film available on Netflix, I think. But she spoke, not too long ago, she spoke about the prospects, given that we're losing species at such an alarming rate, the prospects that many of the species that our children love to dress up as for Halloween are endangered. And where will we be when one of my daughter's closest friends, who loves to dress up as a tiger, tigers are endangered, polar bears are endangered. Could we be facing a future where our children like to dress up as animals from our past, animals that are no longer with us? It's within humanity's power to head off this kind of catastrophe. The signs of growth, the positive signs, are everywhere we look. The signs of negative, the signs of desperation, of serious environmental crisis, those are everywhere too. But we can find positive signs in many, many different places. At Stanford University, a team of scientists and engineers has worked out what it would take to switch the entire country, state by state, to 100% wind, water and solar power, moving completely away from fossil fuels. And what they found is that for every single state, each state is better off by millions of dollars a year. Partly because of the inherent efficiencies of these advanced technologies, that they're just more efficient at generating power than fossil fuels are, but also because the cleaner air means that we've got lower medical bills, that everybody's healthier as a consequence of not breathing air that's polluted with the gunk that comes from burning coal, oil and natural gas. So if we switch to a renewable energy economy, we are better off. Everybody is better off. Another team of scientists and economists, the Deep Decarbonisation Pathways Project, has found similar things, that we can make deep cuts in our carbon emissions without wrecking the economy. One of the best examples of this is close to home, the Susie Hewlett Community Solar Program. And I know that some people have solar power on their roofs. Anybody take advantage of the Susie Hewlett Community Solar Program? A few people did. We have 8 solar panels on our roof, and we generate more solar power now than we use, at least over the course of the year so far. I'll be curious to see what happens in the wintertime, but so far we're generating more power, substantially more power, from the sun than we use. So our house has become a tiny little solar power station. This kind of thing is spreading. Not only do we have solar panels on our house, I know Catherine, who lives just across the road, they have solar panels. One of our other neighbours has just put solar panels in. It turns out that social science tells us one of the clearest indicators of whether someone is going to get solar panels on their roof is if somebody else in the neighbourhood has already done it. So once you plant the seed, it spreads, it grows. So we're in the process of seeing that right now. In Texas of all places, the organisation that manages the major utilities conducted a study recently, and they found that within the next few years there will be no other source of energy that will compete on price with solar power. And they don't have a subsidised system there. They're not trying to artificially prop up solar power. Solar power is just cheaper in Texas than generating power through fossil fuels. We are on the road to an energy revolution. And insiders in the energy industry tell me that people who work in the energy industry are completely freaking out because they have no idea what's coming next. Everything is up in the air. The old ways of doing things are undergoing significant change. They're not quite sure how things are going to shake out, but renewable energy is really shaking things up. So we can shift this trajectory of increasing carbon emissions. We can shift it down. We can do that. That's within our power. But why? Why do it? Is it really about healing the planet? And I want to come back to the idea that I mentioned at the beginning when I talked about the service I organised for my father. Is it really about healing the planet, or is it about healing ourselves? The Earth has experienced worse. The Earth has experienced far worse than what we can throw at it. Let's not kid ourselves. What we're throwing at the Earth is not good. What we're throwing at the Earth is pretty substantial and pretty serious, but the Earth has handled worse than us. For most of the last 500 million years, carbon dioxide levels have been substantially higher than they are today. For about 90% of the last 500 million years, we've had many times the level of carbon dioxide that we have right now. Of course, we had a fundamentally different climate, we had dinosaurs, but the Earth was fine. We've had mass extinctions before. We're heading into a sixth, or in the middle of a sixth mass extinction right now, but that tells us there were 5 that came before, and the Earth was okay. The Earth will be all right. So I'd suggest that we need to take action, yes, for the planet, yes, for polar bears, who seem cuddly when a 7-year-old girl is dressed up as a polar bear, but I'm not sure I want to cuddle one, a real one. So yes, let's take action, yes, for the planet. But ultimately, I'd suggest, it's in our own best interests, it's for ourselves. And as with many acts of altruism, action on the environment can put us back in touch with our best selves. And I'd like to close with a quote from an article that I read in the New Yorker a few years ago. It was a piece by the journalist Elizabeth Colbert, who's written many marvellous things, very enlightening things about climate change and environmental issues more generally. And she was interviewing a woman named Cristina Figueres, and she is the head of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change Secretariat. What that basically means is she is the chief United Nations person when it comes to negotiating reductions in carbon emissions worldwide. So she is the go-to person for climate change at the United Nations. And this is what Elizabeth Colbert writes about her encounter and her interviews with Cristina Figueres. She says, "I asked what would happen if the emissions line for carbon dioxide did not, in fact, start to head down soon. Tears welled up in her eyes, and for a moment she couldn't speak. Ask all the islands," she said finally. "Ask Bangladesh. We just can't let that happen. Do we have the right to deprive people of their homes just because I want to own 3 SUVs? It just doesn't make any sense. And it's not how we think of ourselves. We don't think of ourselves as being egotistical, immoral individuals. And we're not. Fundamentally, we all have a morality bedrock. Every single human being has that." And it's thoughts like that that give me